Thank you, Prue, and thank you to the organisers for having invited me. It is a pleasure to be here, but let me tell you, however sunny you think it is in London, it is sunnier in Manchester. Some of you may express incredulity, but I assure you that that is, for once, correct. So, I'm interested in why employer engagement and curriculum matter for social mobility as well as for skills. But let me say from the outset, I think we should be cautious about making claims about a causal relationship between education and social mobility, and I will come on to that in a moment or two. But the argument I want to make is this. First of all, that the engagement of employers is crucial to the credibility and viability of vocational courses, as well as social mobility, but employers are a diverse bunch. So forgive me if I fall into the trap of referring to employers as if they're all the same. I may well fall into that trap, I apologise. They are just as diverse as educational institutions, just as diverse as educationalists. Secondly, in this regard, curriculum content, knowledge and pedagogy, whether in the workplace or in the college or education institution, are as important as employer engagement. And finally, and perhaps slightly more controversially, there may be tension inherent in maintaining these two positions, but that tension can be productive. Can be productive not just in relation to skills development, but also productive in relation to social mobility and social justice more broadly. Now, as I say, at least the first two of those are not especially controversial. The skills plan, published remarkably to me 2 years ago now, had 4 principles. Here is the first. Firstly, and most importantly, employers must play a leading role. Employers working with expert education professionals need to set the standards. They must define the skills, knowledge and behaviours required for skilled employment. Terrific. The skills plan is quiet on precisely how that collaboration might take place. And really the skills plan is as quiet, as thin as other government documents have been. I'm thinking about Curriculum 2000 or the diplomas not so long ago, and indeed T-levels, has a lot about the categorisation, the comparison, even the final assessment of these qualifications, but rather less on their content and certainly rather less on their pedagogy. And pedagogy, I think, gets us to the heart of this issue. Why is pedagogy so controversial when we're talking about occupationally focused courses? And it's not just me who says this. 5 years ago now, the Commission on Adult Vocational Teaching and Learning said this, they found this. Can we use the term pedagogy? They said a robust vocational teaching and learning system must be underpinned by a serious focus on vocational pedagogy. And yet, as we have gone around the country, visiting sites of vocational teaching and learning and in our seminars, of all the terms we've discussed, the one that gets people most agitated is pedagogy. It might be Brexit now, I suppose, but it was pedagogy back then. Similarly, Bill Lucas and his colleagues, who wrote this terrific report 6 years ago now, How to Teach Vocational Education, a Theory of Vocational Pedagogy. They found the evidence suggests that serious consideration of pedagogy is largely missing in vocational education, and vocational learners are the losers as a result of this omission. I completely agree, whether that is pedagogy in the workplace or pedagogy within colleges who have a focus on occupational education. Now, this matters in relation to our skills, it matters in relation to our economy for this reason. Given the complexity of skill, it is not sufficient from a pedagogical perspective merely to practice as a means to improve. Skill is too important, it is too complex simply to practice as a means to improve, which is why this relationship between employment experience and experience in colleges or in other education institutions is so crucial. So I believe that this attitude towards pedagogy within a vocational context reflects the weak status of vocational education and a kind of a dismissive attitude towards skill, a dismissive understanding of skill, which has been evacuated of knowledge, and incidentally, it also represents a dismissive attitude of those skilled workers in our economy. And I think we need to reclaim the importance of pedagogy, and we need to reclaim the importance of knowledge in both workplace and in college settings. Now, over the last few years, I have spent, well, not enough time actually, but quite a lot of time working with architects. This is Rem Koolhaas, which I think is a fantastic name for an architect, actually. Koolhaas, you know, it's a terrific name for an architect. I have good reasons to be interested in the education of architects, and then I have the real reason. The good reason is that architects in this country have got a well-established system for professional formation. They have a well-developed system of professional education going back at least to the 1950s and arguably till the beginning of the 20th century. And they have a well-integrated system between workplace learning and what happens in universities and college. Those constitute the good reasons. The real reason that I am interested in architects is that I rather wish I had been an architect. And so, like Rem Koolhaas, could have worn a black polo neck jumper to work, sipped espressos and discussed design all day. And I may be joking about the espresso and the design. I'm not joking about the black polo neck jumpers. This is David Chipperfield, and that is our very own Norman Foster. But more importantly, what I have learned from architects about work-based learning is this. Sometimes there should be a tension between what is experienced on placement and what is learned in college. That tension can lead to purposeful learning and to independent decision-making. It has been refreshing for me to speak to well-established architects who are aware that what students are learning in college or in universities is different to what they experience when they are in placement. They appreciate the tension that there is, that tension that keeps their profession alive, keeps it fresh, keeps it developing, rather than having to simply focus on the bottom line. They understand that students come with naive ideas about what it is to be in a business, but they will learn that on placement, and they appreciate that in other places they learn creativity. In other words, that tension can be positive, can be creative. Now, I think that matters. It leads to purposeful learning, as I've said here, but I think it also leads to students, to young people, being able to think beyond where they are at the moment. And that is important, I would argue, for social mobility as well. Because, as Michael Young, who's written much in this area, has put it, the world is not as we experience it. Or rather, you might say, it is not just as we experience it. Curriculum knowledge must be discontinuous, not continuous with everyday experience. And that's why the relationship between employer engagement and what happens within colleges and within schools is so important. If we only, certainly trainees, but if we only know what we experience, then necessarily what we know is limited. Therefore, a relationship, a proper relationship between what is learned in a workplace and what is learned within education institutions is crucial, not just for the development of business, but for the development of a vibrant society. Now, when I've not been spending time with architects, alas, not sipping espresso too often, over the last few years, I have been working on this project, improving teacher education in vocational science, engineering and technology, funded by the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, who, led by David Sainsbury, have long had an interest in this area, technical education as they like to refer to it. And I would like to express my gratitude to the Gatsby Foundation for having been such good and supportive funders of this project. Led by the University of Huddersfield, and we have focused on how subject specialist knowledge might inform pedagogical decisions. So, what have we learned from this project? Well, I've learned a lot from it, but not all of it is directly relevant to what we are talking about today. But let me say this right from the outset. There is a national crisis in recruiting and keeping well-qualified teachers in set subjects, science, engineering, technology in colleges. I don't use the word crisis blithely. I use it from a well-informed point of view, there is a crisis in colleges recruiting and keeping good, well-qualified science, engineering, and technology teachers. That will be a barrier to any kind of development within our education system. And although I'm interested in curriculum, I'm interested in pedagogy, frankly, these are second-order problems if we can't get well-qualified teachers to be teaching on these occupationally focused subjects. But if I can put that to one side, demonstrating how subject specialist knowledge can inform the decisions teachers make is a successful route to valuing that knowledge and to valuing pedagogy. I would argue that the same is true within workplaces. In other words, subject knowledge, whether in the workplace or in colleges, is an important pedagogical tool. Having good subject knowledge means that experiences can be sequenced in a way that allows students on placement to learn effectively. This is what Billet and many others have referred to as the workplace curriculum. He refers to it this way: guided participation in the everyday activities of the workplace with explicit interventions aimed at providing access to forms of knowledge which remain opaque, and also the development of procedures. Pedagogy should inform decisions in the workplace. So employer engagement in itself is not enough. What happens within employer engagement, what happens on placements, it seems to me, itself is absolutely crucial. And a good placement is one where somebody is thinking about it pedagogically. So, why does this matter for social mobility? Well, let me say these three things first of all. Vocational education, which is my interest, is entirely mainstream, despite its often being overlooked. It is not the purpose of vocational education and training to bring about social mobility. It is the purpose of vocational education and training to prepare people for the world of work. It may lead to social mobility in the same way as other academic forms of education may do. It is not right that vocational education is constantly asked to bring about social mobility. Similarly, my second point here, it is the paradox of education, that education both reproduces inequality and it is asked to alleviate inequality. We've already heard reference to independent schools today. Education, whether vocational or academic, is an important site of the reproduction of inequality, and yet at the same time we are asked to alleviate it. And I think it's reasonable that we're asked to alleviate it, but let's remember education is where that reproduction of inequality takes place also. And thirdly, good vocational education may be necessary. I would argue it is certainly necessary for a thriving economy and a just society, but it is not sufficient. Other elements must be in place, not least decent salaries. So, having said all of that, I think it is fair to say that vocational education and training can, or poor vocational education and training, poor employer engagement can be a restriction to social mobility. In a report published by Edge just in the last few weeks, so I would recommend it thoroughly, different attitudes towards vocational education and training. Uric Keep wrote this: "The learning associated with many lower-level vocational qualifications remains task-focused, fragmented, and lacking any serious underpinning theory or deep knowledge." That is a concern if we want to develop our economy, but I would say it's also a concern if we are interested in the social mobility of our young people. Frankly, a young person who's receiving that is not about to be socially mobile. But even if we look at a slightly higher level, and I should say I am an absolute supporter of vocational education and training, I am an advocate of it, but I think it is right that we look at things as they are. In some characteristically very careful research produced by one of the sponsors of this conference, the Centre for Vocational Education Research, looking at earnings of those who have got level 3 BTECs. Now, BTECs are well established, well thought of qualifications, and yet they wrote this: they did not observe positive earnings differentials compared with individuals at the qualification level immediately below. Now, they go on to say there are other circumstances where there are positive differentials, but let's be clear, there are still very significant barriers to social mobility that even good vocational qualifications with good employer engagement will not, on their own, alleviate. And I would argue this is true even at a higher level. We've heard today about destinations data. This is from the longitudinal educational outcomes data, where the government has combined data from schools, from colleges, from universities, and connected that to taxation. This is very, very robust data. If you PAYE, if you pay as you earn, this data is associated with people like you. It is, it's not a sample, it really is a population. Now, I am interested in higher education that is provided in colleges. I'm a supporter of higher education that's produced in colleges, precisely because it does have, very often, good employer engagement. And this is somewhat shown by this. Look at this. This is employment outcomes of graduates by institution types 5 years after graduation. So higher education institutions is at the top, further education colleges is at the bottom. And you can see that if you did your course at a further education college, you are marginally more likely to be in work. Good. Then we turn to salaries. The dark blue are further education colleges, the lighter blue higher education institutions. The line in the middle of the bar is the median pay. And you'll see that consistently, despite that good employer engagement, consistently earnings by graduates from further education colleges are lower. Now look, let me be clear, this is not a failing of higher education in further education colleges. It is not. This is a reflection of an unequal society that we can do something about as educationalists. We have a responsibility to do something about it, but we alone cannot change this. Others need to be involved. We've had a speaker from King's College London. This is produced by a researcher at King's College London. And I haven't found it easy to read. It's been a tremendous challenge to the kind of, if I'm honest, quite smug ideas I've had about education and social mobility. But I recommend it to you against meritocracy. Joe Littler suggests this. The term meritocracy functions as an ideological myth to obscure and extend economic and social inequalities. Let us not also extend that myth in what we suggest education can and cannot do. But what we can say is that as educationalists with a concern for proper employer engagement, we can affect individuals. We may not be able to transform society, but we can have a positive influence on individuals, and that matters to me. And that means that curriculum really matters. Anne-Marie Bathmaker, somebody who has a tremendous interest in this area, she said this: the issue of knowledge is not just a technical question, but relates to questions of equity and justice. If vocational education qualifications are to enable people to gain valuable knowledge and skills and are to open up opportunities rather than constrain and limit futures, then questions of knowledge in these qualifications and how these questions are decided are crucial. That is crucial both in the workplace and within the qualifications as they are delivered in educational institutions. That question of knowledge that will allow young people especially to think beyond where they are, it seems to me, is crucial to social mobility, even if it is just for individuals. Lisa Wheelahan put it this way: the privileged access of the powerful to theoretical abstract knowledge provides them with the ability to mobilize knowledge, to think the unthinkable and the not yet thought. That gets to the heart of social mobility for me, even if it is just for individuals. So, if I may conclude, the kind of things that I'm talking about, I want us to be cautious about claims of social mobility. I want us to be clear that good employer engagement is important, not just for skills, but also for social mobility. But I want us to be careful about the claims that might be made about the relationship between education and social mobility. Nevertheless, this too matters. What we can do may not transform society, but it can transform lives. It can change lives, as James Davis and I have argued recently. Good VET courses with proper curriculum and that productive tension that I talked about between workplace engagement, proper employer engagement, and what happens in the colleges is crucial, not just for skills, but for social mobility, even if it is just for individuals. And that is why I believe it is worth doing well. Thank you.